All right, everyone. In the last module, we kind of started the basics of programming, and we talked about some ideas. We talked about the idea of a function. A function in programming does a task, okay? Many functions can be run multiple times, so we also talked about the idea that functions can take information, which we call arguments. Okay. So if I had something like create canvas, which is a function that built a canvas, I could give arguments like how large is the canvas? Something like that. Okay. Uh, and then we got a little bit more specific. We talked about code blocks, which is when you have some sort of function. It's going to run a bunch of, lines of code all at once. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about some new things today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the concept of variables. Okay. So to understand variables, let's pretend, just for the sake of this conversation, that you own a gas station. Okay. And we are trying to figure out how much money you're going to make per day. Now, the thing about gas stations is gas as a price is constantly fluctuating. It literally changes every day. So yesterday it was $4.25, tomorrow it's $5, tomorrow, the day after that it's $3, it literally changes every day. And also, if you run a business, in this case, the amount of gas that you, or the amount of money you make is based on the number of gallons of gas that's pumped. Now on Monday, maybe people pump 10 gallons, and then Tuesday people pump 100 gallons, and then maybe you're closed on Wednesday, so there's 0 gallons. So the problem here is that you keep having these fluctuating values, right? So if I was going to say, okay, instead of representing how much money you're going to make, instead of taking, like, say, the cost of gas, which is $4, times the number of gallons, which is like 10 gallons, we might represent the cost of gas as gas price. And then rather than give a specific number, like how many gallons, we might just have something that represents how many gallons were, pumped that day. Number of gallons. Okay. So, this is a variable that isn't a specific number, but represents how much, or, the price of gas currently. And this represents how many gallons were pumped that day. Okay. And then you take those two values, you times them out, and that's the amount of money that you make in that day. Okay. So when we talk about a variable means it can vary. It can change. That's what vary means. It means whatever the value is isn't locked into a specific amount that can never change. Okay. So let's think about this in terms of programming. Or let's talk about what a variable is. So, you guys might remember, you guys took algebra in high school, and you had some sort of expression like this, right? X plus 1. And if we wanted to know the value here, it's like, well, we have to know what X is. Now, if X is, say, for instance, 1, then it's 1 plus 1, and the value is 2. If X is 10, then it's 10 plus 1, and the value is 11, so on and so on. Okay. So my point is that X is not constant. It can change. how does this relate to programming? Well, in programming, a variable is a value that can change depending on the conditions or information given to the program. Okay. In other words, we can define a variable and the value can change. It can change during the program based on certain conditions. So I'm working from today's files, which are in-class drills, key 5 variables. I'm going to click on this, and this is exercise 1. And what I'm going to do is we are going to create a variable. Okay. So I'm going to create let's say I wanted to, I want to make this variable called gas price. Okay. What I can do is I'm going to do what's called declaring a variable. Declaring a variable creates an area or a spot, or I should say an item that can hold a value. Okay. So let's say for this program, I want to have a variable that represents gas price. What I'm going to do is do what's called declaring a variable. In JavaScript, the way you declare a variable is you would say the phrase let, okay? And then whatever you want to call the variable. I'm going to call it gas price. When naming a variable, you can call a variable whatever you want, but there's a couple of restrictions. The variable name cannot have any spaces, no special characters like $ or ampersand or anything like that. It is allowed to start with a dollar. Okay, of course I just said that. Anything other than a $, I can't use it. It is allowed to use a $ or an underscore. Can't start with a number, and variable names are case sensitive. Okay. So if I come in here, what I've done is I've declared a variable called gas price. Okay. Another way I could have done this is an older method, is to use the word var, gas price. Var in this case means variable, short for variable. Okay. Now, when you declare a variable, the way I like to think of it is I want you to think about it like you're creating an area. Sorry, I'm trying to find, this makes for great video, I'm sure. I'm trying to, we're going to do like a little, here it is. Okay. So I'm going to do a demonstration of what it means to create a variable, okay, or declare a variable. The way I want you to think of a variable is I want you to think about an actual variable like a container. And what can contain, or like a box? And what can containers hold? Well, they hold things, right? And in this particular case, my container can only hold one thing, okay? It could be a number, it could be a word or a sentence, it could be a value like true or false, but it's only allowed to hold one, okay? And in fact, actually at this point, it's not even anything, okay? Now, in this time, I declared a variable and I've said, okay, it's called gas price. Okay. So this is my handy dandy little, what do you call it? Analogy. I'm going to patent pen it. Here's my variable and it's called gas price. Okay. I can't write it backwards, but like, here, let me see if I can set this up backwards. Otherwise, this is never going to work. There you go. Gas price. Okay. So I have a variable called gas price. And notice that currently there's nothing inside it. Okay. So my variable has no value. I made a variable, that's what declaring it means, but it has no value at the moment. Okay. In fact, if don't worry about how I'm doing this, but I'm going to try to get the value of this variable that I just created. And if that's what this is going to do, it's going to try to get the value. And if I hit it, it's actually going to say undefined. Because what undefined means is that this variable has no value. It's not equal to anything. It's not a number. It's not a word. It's not anything. Okay. It's just this abstract idea. Okay. All right. So you can declare a variable, but it doesn't defaultly give it a value. What I'm going to try to do now is what's called assigning a value. What assigning a value does is it gives a value to a created variable. Okay. Now let's just say for the sake of argument that gas price is currently equal to $4. Okay. So here's my handy dandy notepad here. Four. Okay. And what I'm going to do is put that inside. So if I were to call or look up gas price, it would give me the value of 4. Okay. Now that's like how would this look in actual code? Well, it would look like this. Gas price equals 4. Okay. This is me declaring a variable. Use my bad writing here. This is me assigning, or what is referred to as initializing, a variable. All right. Declaring, initialize. Let me do it again. Let's just pretend we can make another variable. Let's go back to my analogy of like trying to figure out how many gallons of gas people have bought from my gas station. So I'm going to call this number of gallons. Okay. So I would do that by saying let or var number of gallons. Now, maybe just 10. The thing about this is that once again, if I were to try to get the value of this, there is no value. I've created this variable, but it doesn't have anything inside of it. So if I try to get it, it's going to say undefined. Let's just say for the sake of argument, people bought 20 gallons of gas yesterday. So my value is 20. And I'm going to put that in here. Okay. So how would that look? Well, I could say number of gallons equals 20. Okay. Now when I call it, don't worry about, we'll talk about what this is doing, but this is going to get, when I say print and I put the name of the variable there, what this is really doing is it's finding that particular variable, going inside of it and going, what is the value? In this case, the value is 20. So if I hit play, the value is 20. Okay. All right. So we can define or declare a variable. We can then initialize. This is very similar to how we initialized variables in basic mathematics. If I were to come in here and say x is equal to 3, if this was like a basic algebra class, what I've said is there is a variable called x, and I am assigning that the value of 3. Okay. We're just doing the same thing, but we're just adding a little bit here, where, we're declaring to the program that there is a variable and that that it has a particular value, and we're ending it with a semicolon. So it's not exactly the same as math, but you can see a lot of similarities between the two. Okay. So I can create and initialize different type of variables. Okay. Now, in my last two examples, both values were numbers. How much gas was $4, how many gallons were pumped was 20. Those are both numbers. But there's other kinds of information I could store. I could store things like words or sentences, or even concepts like true and false. Okay. So let's talk about the type of variables we can create. Okay. Now, there's actually, is it 7 or 9? I want to say 7 types of variables that we can create in, sorry, it's going to bug me. Number of variable types in JavaScript. There's 8 types. Okay, sorry. There's 8 different types of variables in JavaScript. We're going to talk about 3 of them today. Okay. Eventually, we'll talk about more. Actually, I lied. We're going to talk about 3. So the first type of variable is what's called a number. Okay. A number type variable, like it sounds like, is something that's a number. Okay. This could mean a whole number, like 4 or 10 or 1001. It could also mean a number that has a decimal place, like 3.14, 2.5, 1.25, something like that. Okay. Some things seem like numbers, but they're not. Right? If I want to use a number in programming in JavaScript, the way it works is that when I assign the value, I don't have to put it in quotation marks. Things that are numbers, you can just type out. Okay. You don't have to put a quotation marks or any other kind of syntax. Okay. The thing about numbers is that some things seem like numbers, but they're not. Okay. How can you tell if something should be a number value? And the way I kind of say it is, if you can do math to it and it makes sense, then it's a number. Then it should be a number value or a number variable. What do I mean by that? Well, if let's say the number of gallons I have, right? So, or price. You can take a price of something and you can divide it by 2, right? Take 50% of it. So if something is normally $10 and you take 50% or you divide it by 2, then it's $5, right? That's math, right? And that makes sense. You can take a number and divide it by 2. That makes logical sense. You can take a number and add 1 to it. So if I have 20 gallons and someone buys another gallon, that's 20 plus 1, and that's basic math, and that makes sense, right? Some things seem like they should be numbers, but they're not. Let me give you an example, like a telephone number. Okay. Now, a telephone number might be 415-555-5555, right? Now, this is not a number. It's not like we're not counting or quantifying something. We're not saying there's, I don't even know what this would be. It would be like 4 million. We're not saying something is 4,155,000,000. What we're saying is someone has this particular phone number that happens to be made up of numbers, okay, like numerical numbers. So this is actually kind of more like an ID. It's not a quantification of something, okay, and that's a big distinction. So let's, can you do math to this? Well, can you take a phone number and divide it by 2? I mean, not really. That doesn't make any sense. No one does that. Can you take a phone number and, times it by 5? Like, you wouldn't really do that. That's not logically how people use phone numbers. So it's not a number, it's not a number variable, even though it's technically made up of numbers. Okay. Another one that might seem like a number, but is not, is like an address. If you live at 123 Main Street, once again, this number isn't a quantifier. It's not how many main streets we have. We have 123 main streets. Instead, it's just it's an identification number, right? And, can you do math to 123 Main Street. Can you take 123 Main Street and divide it by 2? I mean, not really. No one would do that. That doesn't really make any sense. So we wouldn't, even though it's made up of numbers, once again, this is not really a number variable, okay? So, but if I was talking about price, price is a quantification of how many dollars something is, or interest rates. It's a percent, quantification of how many percentages something is. If you were going max min number, those are quantifications of something, okay? The next type of variable type is what we refer to as a string. A string is a collection of characters, okay? Like a word or a sentence, okay? Typically, if things have have letters and have letters in them, it's probably a string. Why is it called a string and not like a word or a sentence? So this is like an old geeky thing, but back in the day when they were old computers, they used to put the letters on actual pieces of string and run it through the programs. That's why it's called a string. But anyway, a string is a collection of letters and characters. So like an example of this would be like San Francisco, okay? So if you're trying to say like where someone's born, this is a string. It's a collection of characters, SAN space FRAI, and blah, blah, blah. A color like red, that's a collection of characters. It could be a sentence. I woke up today happy as a clam, okay? That is a string, okay? It doesn't have to be just letters. It could be special characters like, ampersand, $sign. It could even have numbers in it. In this case, 123 Main Street would actually be a string. It's a collection of letters and numbers together that represent an identification of something, okay? When you define something that's a string value, it should always go in quotation marks, okay? So, name equals Ann. Color equals red, address equals 123 Main Street, okay? Should you use, a lot of times people ask me, should I use single quotes or double quotes? The answer really is it doesn't matter, just keep it consistent. What that means is that, if I wanted to make a variable, let name equals, and I can do that, or I could do it as single quotes like this. But what you don't want to do is something like this where you're mix and matching. Okay. By the way, and this is something we're going to get into. So this is my declaring, this is my initializing. You could actually make this all one sentence, so you could use less code. So really what's happening is if I say let name equals and, I could shorten this to basically just be let name equal Ann, okay? So it's still doing the same thing, which is it's declaring and then initializing. It's just doing it all in one sentence, okay? Normally I do mine in double quotations just because that's more consistent. You're going to see that among most programmers, but it's really up to you on that one. Let address equal, 123 Main Street. Let state equals California. Okay, something like that. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is what's called a Boolean. Okay, a Boolean in programming is a logical idea of something being either true or false. Okay, you can think about it as something where the answer is either yes or no. There's nothing in between. Okay, so San Francisco is the capital of California. False. That's not the capital. Okay. It's either true or false. And in this case, it's a false. Okay. Sacramento is the capital of California. True. Okay. The way I like to think of it is like, it's like a light switch. Okay. And in this case, it's a light switch where there's no dimmer. So it's either always on or it's always off. There's nothing in between. Okay. So we might have information that we're trying to store, and it's either true or it's not true, or it's false, okay? So let's say I want to know, has the dog been walked? So I have a variable that I'm going to create called dog walked. Okay. So has the dog been walked? Let's say it has not. So false. Okay. Or if the dog has been walked, dog walked, true. So the dog has been walked. Okay. Let's say I want to know, has someone done the dishes? Dishes washed. No one has washed the dishes. Dishes washed equals false. Later on, someone comes and washes those dishes. Dishes washed equals true. Okay. So you can kind of think about, why would this come up in a program? Well, there might be situations in a program where you're checking something. Like imagine you're in a video game, right? And the player can collect items like a magic wand or something like that, or a key that opens up a door. You might want to check, does the player have the magic wand or does the player have the key? If they don't have it, let's, oops. Has key, false. Then they collect the key, has key, true. Okay. These are values that we can check for, and then eventually we can write things that use that information. Okay. All right, so here's a little exercise I kind of want you guys to think about. I want you to think about if you were going to make a program that involves you, what kind of variables would you have about yourself? And, what type of variables would those be? So for instance, like, okay, let's say I'm writing a program and I want to have my name. So name equals David. Okay. Or maybe let's make it first name. Then I want to have something that represents my last name. Let last name equals Hurwitz. Okay. Let's try to think of a number variable. Let age equals 42. Okay. Or I could, list my income, or I don't know, what's another number variable? I don't know, my weight, or, something like that. Um, there's a lot of things you could probably do. How many fingers I have, number of fingers. And right, or I do at least, number of toes, 10, so on and so on. Let's say I wanted to do a Boolean, I don't know. What's something? Legal to drink. Legal to drink. In America, being legal to drink is meaning you're above the age of 21. So true. I am legal to drink. Can collect Social Security. Well, in America, to collect Social Security, you have to be 65 or older. I am not above 65, so that would be false. Okay. So, these are just kind of examples, but I want you to think about some, variable types or variables that might represent you. And what type of variable would that be? Would it be a number? Would it be a string? Would it be a Boolean of some sort? That kind of thing. All right, so just kind of spend a moment. And then the next one, we're going to talk about redefining variables. And then we'll talk about variable substitution. Okay.